Welcome. You have found a quiet place, a place where history moves slowly, where the world outside grows soft and distant, and where your only task is to rest. Tonight, we travel back, a very long way back, before hospitals, before pharmacies, before the science we now take for granted. We travel to a time when healing was an art passed from hand to hand, from elder to apprentice, from temple to village, from one generation to the next. Tonight, we explore ancient medicine, specifically the herbs, the plants, the roots and leaves and bark that early human beings discovered over thousands of years carried meaning beyond food. They carried healing. 3 civilizations will guide us through this story. Mesopotamia, the land between 2 rivers, one of the earliest places on Earth where human beings gathered in organized society, and where the first known written records of medicinal plants were set down in clay. Egypt, a civilization built beside the longest river on Earth, where healers wore the robes of priests and priests carried the knowledge of plants. And India, where ancient physicians organized the natural world into one of the most sophisticated systems of herbal medicine in all of human history. There is no rush tonight. Each story will arrive gently, each fact will be offered slowly, and each moment of silence is an invitation for your body to grow a little heavier, a little more still. Let us begin. Mesopotamia. The word comes from ancient Greek. It means the land between the rivers. Those rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates, 2 great bodies of water that swept down from the mountains of what is now eastern Turkey and flowed south toward the Persian Gulf, through the land we now call Iraq. Between these rivers, beginning around 3500 BC and perhaps earlier, a civilization grew. We call it Sumerian. The people who built it called themselves the Black-Headed People. They built cities, they invented writing, they organized labor, trade, religion, and law. And somewhere in those early centuries, they looked at the plants growing along the riverbanks, and they began to write down what those plants could do. Imagine the landscape for a moment. Flat, sun-baked earth stretching toward the horizon in every direction. The sky enormous and pale with heat in summer, the rivers green and slow. Along their banks, reeds grew dense and tall. Date palms lined the water's edge, and in the shade, in the cooler months, plants of every kind pushed through the earth. Thyme, coriander, mustard, licorice root, cedar, myrrh. The Sumerians noticed these plants. They noticed which ones, when eaten, caused the body to feel different, which ones, when applied to the skin, reduced swelling, which ones, when boiled and inhaled, seemed to ease a cough. They noticed, and eventually they wrote it down. The earliest surviving record of a medicinal herb list dates to approximately 2100 BCE. It was written on a clay tablet by a Sumerian scribe. The tablet was discovered in the late 19th century, and when translated, it contained a list of plant-based remedies, instructions for preparation and use. It is one of the oldest medical documents ever found. Think about that for a moment. 4,000 years ago, someone sat down and felt that this knowledge was important enough to preserve, to press into clay with a stylus, to leave behind for whoever might come next. That impulse to record, to share, to preserve is one of the most human things we know. Let us imagine for a moment what it was like to be an herb gatherer in ancient Sumer. Your day begins before the sun rises. The air is cool. The ground still holds the night's moisture. You wrap a length of rough woven cloth around your shoulders and walk out through the city gate, past the mud brick walls, past the granaries, past the smaller houses at the city's edge. You carry a woven basket and a small bronze knife. You know exactly where you are going. You have been going there since you were a child, learning at the side of an older healer. You know which plants grow near the water's edge, which prefer the dry, cracked soil farther from the river. You know which ones must be gathered before the flower opens, which roots are best pulled in the season of short days, which leaves lose their strength if bruised. This knowledge was not written down when you learned it. It lived in the voice of your teacher, and before that, in the voice of their teacher, and so on, back into a time beyond memory. One of the most important plants in the Sumerian healer's knowledge was licorice root. The plant, known to science as Glycyrrhiza glabra, grows across parts of the Middle East and Central Asia. Its roots are sweet. Its active compounds include glycyrrhizin, which has documented anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. The Sumerians did not have those words. They did not speak of glycyrrhizin, but they knew what the root did. They used it for coughs, for sore throats, for stomach complaints. They boiled it with other plants. They pressed it into preparations that could be applied externally, and they were right to use it. Modern pharmacology has confirmed that licorice root has real, measurable effects on the body. The Sumerians found this, not in a laboratory, but by careful patient observation over generations. Another plant that appears in ancient Mesopotamian records is thyme. Thyme is a small, fragrant herb that many people today use in cooking, but the Sumerians used it medicinally. Records suggest it was used as an antiseptic, applied to wounds, used to help keep the body clean in an age before modern understanding of infection. Again, they were not wrong. Thyme contains thymol, a compound with well-documented antibacterial properties. It is still used today in some antiseptic preparations. The ancient Mesopotamians had stumbled upon something real. In ancient Mesopotamia, healing was not separate from religion. This is important to understand. The Sumerians, and later the Babylonians who built upon their culture, believed that illness had spiritual dimensions, that the body and the divine world were in constant relationship, that what happened in the physical world was tied to what happened in the world of the unseen. Healers, in this context, held a dual role. There were those we might call as the physicians. They worked with plants, with preparations, with practical treatments. They were, in modern terms, the closest thing to doctors, and there were those called shippu, the healers of a more spiritual kind. They worked with prayer, with ritual, with spoken words, meant to address the spiritual dimension of illness. Often, these two roles worked together. A patient with a fever might receive both a plant-based remedy and a ritual prayer. The physical and the spiritual were treated as two aspects of the same problem. This perspective, that human well-being is not purely physical, was not unique to Mesopotamia. We will see it again in Egypt, in India, in Persia. Across the ancient world, healers understood that the person who came to them was not simply a body. They were a human being, embedded in a family, a community, a cosmos. The temples of ancient Mesopotamia were not only places of worship, they were also centers of knowledge, Scribes trained there. Records were kept there, and in their archives, the accumulated medical knowledge of generations was stored on thousands of clay tablets. Many of these tablets were discovered in the ruins of the Great Library at Nineveh, built by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal around 650 BC. That library held tens of thousands of tablets, covering everything from astronomy to law to medicine. Among them were detailed botanical lists, plants organized by their properties, their uses, their methods of preparation. These are among the most complete surviving records of ancient herbal knowledge. There is one plant that appears repeatedly in Mesopotamian texts. Cedar, the cedar tree, particularly Cedrus libani, the cedar of Lebanon, was considered not only medicinally important, but sacred. Its wood was prized, its resin was used in medicine, its fragrance was used in rituals. The great cedar forests of the ancient world grew in what is now Lebanon and parts of Syria and Turkey. To the Mesopotamians of the flat plains, those mountains and their forests were distant places, places of mystery and power. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written stories in human history, the cedar forest is guarded by a monstrous being. The hero Gilgamesh must confront this guardian to enter. The forest is not merely a place of trees, it is a place of great significance in the ancient imagination. Cedar resin, the sticky aromatic substance produced by the tree, appears in Mesopotamian medical texts. It was used externally on wounds and skin conditions. It was believed to have preserving properties. The Babylonians, who flourished in Mesopotamia from roughly 1900 BC onward, inherited the Sumerian knowledge of plants and expanded it. The famous Code of Hammurabi, the set of laws inscribed on a large stone stele, includes regulations governing physicians, their fees, their responsibilities, their penalties for harm. This tells us something important. By the time of Hammurabi, around 1754 BC, medicine was organized enough that society felt it needed regulation. Healers were recognized as a distinct class of people. Their work had value and legal standing. Let us rest for a moment in what we have learned. The Mesopotamians, the Sumerians and Babylonians and Assyrians, who built civilization in the land between two rivers, were not primitive. They were careful, thoughtful, organized. They built cities when most of the world's people lived in scattered communities. They invented writing to keep records of everything that mattered. Grain, law, astronomy, and yes, medicine. They looked at the natural world around them, at the licorice root and the thyme and the cedar, and they did not simply accept what they found. They asked questions. They observed. They organized what they learned. And they wrote it down. The clay tablets of Mesopotamia have outlasted empires. They survived the fall of Sumer, the rise and fall of Babylon, the conquest of Alexander the Great, the changes of 100 dynasties. They sit today in museums in London, in Berlin, in Paris, in Baghdad, waiting for scholars to read them, still carrying the knowledge of people who lived 4,000 years ago, still telling us what they knew about the earth beneath their feet and the plants that grew from it. Now let us cross the desert. Let us follow the great trade routes that connected the ancient world, west and south, across the Sinai Peninsula toward the banks of the longest river on earth. Let us go to Egypt. The Nile. There is no river quite like it. In a landscape that is, for the most part desert, the Nile cuts a green line from south to north, from the mountains of Central Africa to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. Every year, for thousands of years, the river flooded its banks, and as the waters receded, they left behind a layer of dark, rich soil. In that soil, almost anything would grow. The ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, the Black Land, named for the color of that river-fed earth. Everything beyond the reach of the Nile's water was Deshret, the Red Land, the desert, harsh and unforgiving. The Egyptians lived in the thin strip of green between these two worlds, and in that green strip they cultivated an extraordinary variety of plants. Among those plants, many were medicinal. Garlic grew abundantly in Egyptian soil. Coriander was cultivated, fenugreek, cumin, aloe vera, blue lotus, a water plant of the Nile, castor oil plant, frankincense, and myrrh, brought by trade from the south and east. Egyptian medicine developed over an enormous span of time. The civilization we call ancient Egypt lasted, in various forms, for roughly 3,000 years, from about 3100 BC to the 1st century BC, 3,000 years. That is longer than from the birth of Jesus to today. Across those 3,000 years, Egyptian medical knowledge was accumulated, refined, and in many cases written down on papyrus. The paper-like material made from the stems of the papyrus reed that grew abundantly in the Nile Delta. Most of that papyrus is gone, destroyed by time, by moisture, by fire, by simple decay. But some survived, and what survived tells us that Egyptian medicine was remarkably sophisticated. In 1872, a German Egyptologist named Georg Ebers purchased a remarkable document in the Egyptian city of Luxor. The seller claimed it had been found between the legs of a mummy in a tomb near the ancient site of Thebes. Whether that story is entirely accurate, we cannot say. But the document itself, now known as the Ebers Papyrus, is real, and it is extraordinary. The Ebers Papyrus dates to approximately 1550 BC, but the knowledge it contains is believed to be much older, compiled from earlier sources that are themselves long lost. It is roughly 20 meters long, written in hieratic script, a cursive form of hieroglyphics. It contains over 700 formulas and remedies, references to hundreds of plants, minerals, and animal products used in medicine. It is one of the most important medical documents ever discovered. What kinds of things does it describe? Treatments for stomach complaints, for eye conditions, for skin problems, for headaches, for bites and stings, for problems of the heart, for conditions of the lungs. The Ebers Papyrus also contains a section on the heart and the blood vessels. The ancient Egyptians had observed that blood moved through the body via channels. They did not understand the mechanics as we do now, but they understood that the heart was central, that it sent something outward through the body, and that this system could become diseased. Among the herbal remedies described in the Ebers Papyrus, a few stand out. Garlic appears numerous times. It was used for a wide variety of conditions: infections, intestinal problems, fatigue, and they were not wrong. Garlic contains allicin, a compound with documented antibacterial and antifungal properties. Studies have confirmed that garlic has measurable effects on blood pressure and immune function. The Egyptians knew this not from modern chemistry, but from millennia of careful use. Aloe vera also appears. The plant, its gel-filled leaves, was used for burns and skin conditions. This too has been confirmed by modern research. Aloe vera gel has cooling, anti-inflammatory properties. It is still used in burn treatment today. Fenugreek, a small leguminous plant, was used for digestive complaints and for conditions affecting nursing mothers. Again, modern studies have found that fenugreek has real effects on digestion. The Egyptians were not guessing, they were observing, and across thousands of years, they refined their observations into something that worked. In ancient Egypt, as in Mesopotamia, medicine and religion were not separate. The most famous physician in all of Egyptian history was a man named Imhotep. Imhotep lived during the reign of the pharaoh Djoser, around 2650 BCE. He was not only a physician, he was also an architect, credited with designing the step pyramid at Saqqara, one of the earliest large stone structures ever built. He was a scribe, a sage, a high priest. He was, in the Egyptian mind, a man who touched the sacred. After his death, Imhotep was venerated, eventually honored as a symbol of divine wisdom. Patients would come to his temples seeking healing, drawn by the sacred reputation he had earned in life. Egyptian physicians underwent training. There were medical schools, perhaps centered at temples like the Parank, the House of Life, where scrolls and knowledge were stored, and where students learned their craft. A physician in ancient Egypt might specialize. There were those who treated only eyes, those who treated only teeth, those who focused on the digestive system. Specialization in medicine was not, as many assume, a modern invention. The Egyptians were doing it 3,500 years ago. Let us spend a moment in an Egyptian garden, not the garden of a wealthy noble, though those were remarkable, but a more modest garden, the kind that might belong to a temple healer or a district physician. It is morning. The sun has not yet risen fully above the horizon, but the sky is already bright, a pale amber near the east. The air is still cool. The Nile is nearby. You can smell it, a particular smell of fresh water and dark earth and green growing things. The garden is walled, mud brick, slightly crumbling at the top. Inside, carefully tended rows of plants. Nearest the gate, garlic, its long, slender, leaves bright green in the low morning light. Behind it, coriander, already going to flower, its white clusters catching the first sun. Along one wall, aloe vera, its thick, spiky leaves holding their moisture against the heat to come. Beside it, castor oil plants, tall and heavy, their enormous leaves casting pools of shadow. Near the small irrigation channel, blue lotus growing in the shallow water. Its flowers will open later in the day. The healer who tends this garden is not a young person. This knowledge takes time, years of learning, years of practice. The hands that move through these plants in the early morning know them the way a reader knows favorite books, by sight, by feel, by smell. To pick the garlic too early is to waste it. To leave the coriander seeds too long on the plant is to lose them to the wind. The aloe must be cut carefully. The gel is inside, and it must not be exposed to air too long before use. This is skill. This is craft. This is accumulated knowledge stretching back, in Egypt's case, more than 1,000 years by the time of the Ebers Papyrus. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, Another surviving Egyptian medical document is different in character. Where the Ebers covers a broad range of remedies, the Edwin Smith is more surgical. It describes injuries, wounds, broken bones, dislocations, and their treatment. It is in many ways a shockingly modern document. It is analytical. For each case, it states the condition, the examination, the diagnosis, and the treatment. It uses the language of observation. If you examine a man with a gaping wound of his head, one entry begins, and then it proceeds methodically through what to look for, what it means, and what to do. This is clinical thinking, more than 3,500 years old. What happened to Egyptian medicine? For a long time, it flourished. Egypt was known throughout the ancient Mediterranean world as a place of great medical learning. Greek travelers came to Egypt to study. Persian kings sent for Egyptian physicians. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BC, Greek culture and Egyptian culture began to merge in a remarkable way. The city of Alexandria, built on the Mediterranean coast at the mouth of the Nile, became the greatest center of learning in the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria held hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Scholars from across the known world gathered there. Medical knowledge from Egypt, from Greece, from the East, all flowed into that single extraordinary place. One of the most significant figures who emerged from this merged world was Dioscorides, a Greek physician living in the 1st century of the Common Era who compiled a 5-volume work called De Materia Medica. It described more than 600 plants. It was so thorough, so systematic, that it remained the primary reference text for European and Islamic pharmacology for more than 1,500 years. Dioscorides stood on the shoulders of Egyptians, of Greeks, of traders and travelers who had moved knowledge across the ancient world for centuries. Knowledge does not stay in one place. It travels, it accumulates, it builds. Egyptian medicine is a testament to that accumulation. 3,000 years of careful observation, of watching the natural world, of understanding that certain plants and certain preparations at certain times could ease suffering and restore health. They did not have microscopes. They did not have chemistry. They did not have clinical trials. But they had something powerful. Time now we travel east, farther east than before, across the ancient trade routes that connected the known world, past the Persian highlands, into the vast Indian subcontinent, where, in the valley of the Indus River and later in the great plains of the Ganges, a civilization grew that would produce one of the most complete systems of herbal medicine the world has ever known. India, the subcontinent, is enormous, diverse, home to hundreds of languages, dozens of ecosystems, thousands of plant species. The earliest civilization we know of in South Asia is the Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization, after one of its major cities. It flourished from roughly 3,300 Bake to 1,300 Bake in the area that is now Pakistan and northwest India. The Harappan cities, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dholavira, were planned with remarkable sophistication. They had drainage systems, grid-patterned streets, public baths, warehouses, and evidence of standardized weights and measures, suggesting trade was organized and systematic. We know very little about Harappan medicine specifically. Their script has not yet been fully deciphered, but we know they lived near rich river valleys with abundant plant life. and we know they had contact with Mesopotamia. Artifacts from both civilizations have been found in each other's territories. What comes after the Harappan civilization and what forms the basis of ancient Indian medical knowledge as we understand it is the tradition preserved in texts called the Vedas. The Vedas are among the oldest texts in the world, composed in Sanskrit, beginning perhaps around 1500 BC or earlier. They are religious texts primarily, hymns, rituals, cosmological knowledge, but embedded within them is also medical knowledge. The Atharva Veda, the fourth and youngest of the main Vedic texts, contains extensive passages on healing, on plants, on the treatment of disease, on the relationship between the body, the mind, and the natural world. From this Vedic foundation would eventually grow one of the most organized systems of herbal medicine in human history. Ayurveda, the word comes from Sanskrit. Ayur means life, Veda means knowledge. Ayurveda, the knowledge of life. Ayurveda, as a formal medical system, is traditionally associated with two great physicians, Charaka, who is credited with the Charaka Samhita, a comprehensive text on internal medicine. The Charaka Samhita discusses hundreds of herbs and their properties in remarkable detail, and Sushruta, credited with the Sushruta Samhita, a text on surgery that is in some ways even more remarkable. Sushruta describes surgical instruments, techniques for operating on cataracts, procedures for reconstructing the nose with a sophistication that was not matched in Europe for well over 1,000 years. The Ayurvedic understanding of the body was organized around three fundamental forces called doshas: vata, associated with movement, air, and space, the force that governs circulation and nerve impulses; pitta, associated with heat, fire, and transformation, the force that governs digestion and metabolism; kapha, associated with stability, earth, and water, the force that governs structure and immunity. Every person in the Ayurvedic framework has a unique combination of these three forces, a constitution that is their natural state. Illness in this framework occurs when the doshas are out of balance. Treatment, including herbal treatment, was aimed at restoring that balance. This is a different model from our modern understanding of disease, but the Ayurvedic model produced remarkable results. The herbs prescribed within this system, in many cases, have been confirmed by modern research to have exactly the effects the ancient physicians attributed to them. Ashwagandha, known to science as Withania somnifera, was used in Ayurveda as what they called a rasayana, a rejuvenating tonic. It was given for fatigue, for weakness, for conditions of the mind and nervous system. Modern studies have found that ashwagandha contains compounds, particularly withanolides, that have measurable adaptogenic effects. They help the body manage stress responses. They have shown effects on sleep quality and feelings of anxiety. The ancient Indian physicians prescribed ashwagandha for exactly these purposes, thousands of years before modern medicine had words to describe those effects. Turmeric, the brilliant golden spice that colors so much of Indian cuisine, was also a medicine, used in Ayurveda for inflammatory conditions, for joint pain, for digestive complaints. Turmeric contains curcumin, an active compound with documented anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. It is one of the most studied natural compounds in modern pharmacology. The Indian physicians who prescribed it did not know about curcumin, but they observed over centuries that it worked, and they were correct. Neem, a tree native to the Indian subcontinent, was called the village pharmacy by those who depended on it. Its leaves, bark, seeds, and oil were used for an enormous range of conditions: skin conditions, dental care, digestive health, fever. Modern research has confirmed antimicrobial, antifungal, and anti-inflammatory properties across multiple parts of the neem tree. One tree, dozens of uses, known for millennia. Now, briefly, let us step into Persia. The Persian Empire, at its height under Cyrus the Great, and his successors in the 6th and 5th centuries BC, was the largest empire the world had seen to that point. It stretched from Egypt in the west to the borders of India in the east. In between, it encompassed an extraordinary variety of landscapes: mountain ranges, dry plateaus, fertile river valleys, forests, steppes, and in those landscapes, an extraordinary variety of plants. Persian medicine drew on multiple traditions, from Mesopotamia, which was part of the Persian world, from Egypt, which briefly came under Persian rule, from India, with which Persia maintained trade and cultural contact. The Persians were notable integrators. They gathered knowledge from the peoples they encountered and synthesized it into their own tradition. One of the most important plants in Persian herbal tradition is saffron. The dried stigmas of the crocus flower, harvested by hand, have been used in the Middle East and Persia for thousands of years. Saffron was used medicinally for a wide range of conditions: for mood, for digestion, for the health of the eyes. In recent decades, saffron has been studied extensively by pharmacologists. Multiple trials have found that saffron extracts have measurable effects on mood and anxiety, comparable in some studies to low doses of pharmaceutical antidepressants. The Persian physicians who prescribed it for these conditions were, again, not wrong. The Persian royal courts maintained elaborate gardens, paradisa, the word from which we derive the English word paradise. These gardens were walled, shaded, watered, and planted with an intentional mix of fruit trees, ornamental plants, and medicinal herbs. The garden was not merely ornamental, it was a living pharmacy. The plants in it were cultivated, tended, harvested. Knowledge of their properties was part of the education of court physicians. The greatest physician of the Persian tradition, and one of the greatest physicians in all of human history, was Ibn Sina. He is known in the Western tradition as Avicenna. Ibn Sina was born in 980 of the Common Era in what is now Uzbekistan. He wrote prodigiously across philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. His masterwork, Al-Qanun fil Tibb, the Canon of Medicine, was a 5-volume encyclopedia of medical knowledge that synthesized Greek, Persian, Indian, and Arab traditions. The Canon remained the primary medical textbook in European universities for 600 years. In it, Ibn Sina discussed hundreds of herbs, their properties, their methods of preparation, their interactions with the body. He was building on everything that had come before: Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, Persia, Greece, organizing it with extraordinary clarity and system. What strikes us, looking across these civilizations, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, Persia, is not how different they were. It is how similar. In every culture, human beings looked at the world around them and asked the same question: why do some people suffer and others recover? What in the natural world can help? In every culture, they found answers in plants, and in every culture, they developed ways of preserving that knowledge, passing it on, building upon it. The Sumerian scribe pressing herb names into clay, the Egyptian physician kneeling in a garden before dawn, harvesting garlic, the Ayurvedic student memorizing Sanskrit verses about the properties of ashwagandha, the Persian court physician cataloging the contents of a royal garden. These are not different stories. They are the same story, told in different languages, in different landscapes, under different skies. The story of human beings trying to understand the world well enough to ease suffering, and they succeeded. Not perfectly, not completely. There was much they misunderstood. There were treatments that did not work, explanations that were wrong. But the plants, in many cases, were right. The knowledge, built up across thousands of years, produced genuine understanding. Understanding that modern pharmacology has confirmed again and again. Licorice root, garlic, aloe vera, turmeric, ashwagandha, saffron, thyme, neem, these were not inventions of the modern age. They were gifts from people who lived long before us, who paid careful attention to the world they were given, and left the record of what they found. We have traveled far tonight, across thousands of miles, across thousands of years. We have walked through temple gardens in Mesopotamia, along the Nile in Egypt, through the forests and plains of ancient India, into the walled gardens of Persia. We have met, in passing, the people who carried this knowledge, who gathered it, tested it, wrote it down, taught it, who made sure it would survive them. And now, the journey asks nothing more of you. There is nothing to remember, nothing to hold. Simply allow what you have heard to settle, like rain on earth, like the slow accumulation of knowledge across time. You are in a quiet place now. Your body is heavy. Your breathing has slowed without your having noticed. The sounds around you are gentle and far away. The ancient healers who tended their gardens in the early morning, the scribes who pressed their stylus into wet clay in lamplight, the physicians who bent over their patients in stone-floored rooms. They did their work, and they rested. Now you rest too. The night is long. There is nowhere else to be.